Thank you, Commissioner. Dziękuję bardzo, panie komisarzu, za
Thank you very much for your very important statement, Mr. Commissioner. I have received 5 draft resolutions from 5 largest political groups of the European Parliament. I would like to thank you very much, colleagues, for your active participation. I would also like to thank our friends from Ukraine. I would like to hereby close this debate, and this resolution will be voted later today. And the next topic is the Philippines and the case of Senator Leila Lima. The first to speak will be the authors of this draft resolution. Mr. Anders Primdal Vistisen is the first to speak. You have 1 minute. Thank you.
Today's debate on the situation in the Philippines really has 2 components. On the one side, there's no doubt that any country has the right to defend itself against crime and drug gangs. However, on the other hand, we expect that a democracy like the Philippines would carry out that fight against crime in a proportional way that respects international law. And so that's why it's very disturbing that on the one hand, we see the Philippine police has a really use of excessive force against drug crimes, and it's important that we have full democratic surveillance of the police, and we also have to look at the arrest and the court case against Senator de Lima. It's really extreme, and we have to do all we can to ensure a fair trial for her and that the senator enjoys full legal guarantees once we actually have this case before court. Thank you very much.
Tak. Thank you. Next.
Dziękuję.
Madam Deputy Barbara Lechbichler. 1.5 minutes, please.
Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, President. In September last year, we made reference in a resolution to the deteriorating human rights situation in the Philippines. President Duterte's lethal battle against drugs is thought to have cost 7,500 people their lives in the year since he took office. We call upon the Philippines to stop this killings. The police and the newly established military must respect by international legal standards in their campaigns. And today, our call remains. It's not just a question of extrajudicial killings, but also torture and the disappearance of people that must be investigated straight away, and those responsible must be brought before courts. Critics of President Duterte fear arbitrary arrests. They should be secure from that. In 2007, the Philippines took an important step for the country and the region in abolishing the death penalty, and now the draft bill calls for a reintroduction of the death penalty, and that's just been approved by the House of Representatives. I appeal to the government of the Philippines urgently to step back from introducing the death penalty again, not least because it doesn't have any greater deterrent effect than other penalties. And I'd like to end with the appeal that the Senator Leila Lima should be released as soon as possible. All charges should be dropped and her security should be guaranteed. Thank you.
Next speaker, Onorevole Ignacio Corrao, 1 minuto, por favor.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's not all that long since we've had a resolution on the Philippines, but unfortunately no progress has happened in the interim. The war on drugs declared by President Duterte has caused more than 7,500 civil population victims. The government's basically allowing people to be killed, and it's not just drug traffickers, of course, but children and completely innocent people. The effects of this pitiless campaign are destroying entire families. The war on drugs is becoming a civil war. The only difference is that the people are terrified at the slaughter and are totally unable to respond. Using the war on drugs as an excuse, the government's now trying to jail and punish people who oppose it. We can see this in the trial of Senator de Lima, who has criticised the president in the past when he was mayor of Davao. We do hope the European Union responds strongly here. We can't allow these murders to carry on unchecked. Thank you.
Grazie tanto onorevole Corrao. Next speaker, Madam Deputy Soraya Post. 1 minute, take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Yes, dear colleagues, President Duterte in the Philippines has emerged as a leading violator of human rights. Drug users are publicly humiliated, extrajudicial killings have become a daily event, and not just criminals are being done away with. Recently, an environmental activist, Mia Massacre Green, was murdered in her car in front of her 3 children. Duterte's war against drugs is actually a war against democracy, and now he's turned his weapons against a member of the opposition. Senator Leila M de Lima has been, as actually one of the few politicians in the Philippines, has been someone who dared to oppose his brutality, and now she herself has been indicted for a drug crime. And it's clear that the evidence has been fabricated. Mr. Duterte, this insanity must end. I would encourage everyone, please, Senator Leila M. de Lima has to be released immediately.
Thank you. Madame Deputy Marie-Christine Vergiat, 1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. The situation indeed has not stopped getting worse in the Philippines. The war on drugs launched by President Duterte from when he took power in June 2016 has caused 7,000 plus deaths, above all in poor areas. Mr. Duterte wants to pursue the policy he had as mayor of Davao City, which Mrs. de Lima rightly condemned. The ministers of justice, presidents of the Senate and Mrs. de Lima have unceasingly denounced extrajudicial killings, and no doubt the evidence against her has been completely fabricated, leading to her arrest. Human rights defenders and journalists in particular are facing threats of intimidation. President Duterte is openly threatening some of them with death. It's time to act, yes. Mrs. de Lima must be set free and protected, and she must, at a minimum, have the right to a fair trial. The death penalty draft bill must be renounced. The EU can use the GSP plus preferences to do this.
Madame Deputy Vergiat, and 2 next speakers are from Czech Republic. First of all, Madam Dita Harantsova. 2 minutes, take the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's very disappointing to stand here to discuss the human rights situation in the Philippines again so soon. Just 6 months ago, we passed a resolution to express our serious concern at a violent crackdown by President Duterte on users and sellers of narcotics. Today, this policy continues to claim the lives of thousands through extrajudicial killings, with more than 60% of deaths carried out by unknown assassins and under complete impunity. Senator Leila de Lima has been a strong voice, raising legitimate concerns over the legality, humanity and actual effectiveness of such a brutal policy. De Lima is now being punished for simply condemning Duterte's war on drugs and attempting to legally investigate the killings in accordance with the rule of law. Freedom of speech and political opposition are critical to the functioning of any democracy. The government must therefore drop its charges against Leila de Lima and guarantee her protection from any further harassment. Moreover, I call on the government of the Philippines to put an immediate end to the wave of extrajudicial executions taking place and to condemn and investigate the actions of vigilante groups carrying out these killings. Illegal drug trade in the Philippines is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. But encouraging and condoning murder is not a solution. No matter how serious an issue may be, no government can permit violations of human rights and the rule of law to achieve an outcome. While condemning these actions, the EU should also seek to assist the government to uphold its human rights obligations. Thank you.
Děkuji. Next speaker, next author of the resolution, Deputy Tomasz Zdechowski. 1 minute, please.
Děkuji, pane předsedající.
Thank you very much, Chair. The opposition senator, Leila de Lima, is a really horrifying example of the oppression of citizens in Philippines. According to our party, this is completely unacceptable that someone who's simply pointing out the negative effects of Duarte's campaign has also been arrested. And of course, this was arrested because of invented crimes, and ended up in being a really unbearable situation. The very right to live is endangered based on the application of the law and the use of executions and capital punishment in connection with narcotic crimes. So we have to appeal to the Philippines to release the senator and appeal to them not to punish its citizens.
Pane poslanec Zdechowski. Now we have time for representatives of political groups. As first, on behalf of EPP, pan poseł Krzysztof Hetman. 1 minuta, bardzo proszę.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, it is without a doubt that drugs are a threat to society, and war against drugs is important and necessary. Unfortunately, this very noble objective is not implemented rightly in the Philippines. First of all, the charges of drug trafficking against Senator de Lima are fictitious and are not an element of fight against drugs, but an element of a political fight. It is also a cause for great concern for us to observe the current shape of the war against drug trafficking of President Rodrigo Duterte. Over 7,000 people died in the hands of police or vigilante groups as part of the war against drugs. Thus, I believe that the European Union should use all instruments at hand in order to influence the authorities in the Philippines to stop these practices and to respect human rights. Thank you.
David Martin, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, President. Since coming to power almost 9 months ago, President Duterte has proven himself an impulsive and brutal leader. This resolution focuses on the politically motivated arrest of an outspoken critic of the President, but her situation is only a small part of the escalating instability and the climate of fear in the Philippines, motivated by the President's policies. Senator de Lima's arrest signals that the President is willing to take personal political feuds to the highest level. It also raises serious concerns for other opposition politicians and activists in the country. Let us be clear about this. This is not a war on drugs. This is a war on the urban poor. This is a war, as my colleague has said, on democracy, and this is a war on human rights. Drugs are being used as the justification but they are not the motivation. We must work with all our partners and all those who support due process and democracy in the Philippines to convince Mr Duarte's government to stop the re-establishment of the death penalty, to review the minimum age of criminal liability and to end these extrajudicial killings and political persecution. The Philippines is an important player in the region and needs stability and democracy, and we should be supporting it in that. I was proud 2 years ago to back the re-granting of GSP Plus to the Philippines, but frankly, if the human rights situation in the country does not improve, we should take the logical course, which is to say that GSP Plus is granted on the conditions of accepting certain human rights and other labour rights. And if these are not respected, GSP Plus has to be removed. Thank you, President.
And now on behalf of the EFD Group, Honourable Fabio Massimo Castaldo, 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. As soon as Mr. Duterte became president in June last year, he began his war on drugs, and 7,000 people have been killed by the police or paramilitary vigilantes. A brutal campaign that's supposed to carry on until 2022. And it's small drug users who are affected, whereas the big drug barons are left untouched. A new victim is Senator De Lima, who has been dealing with justice and human rights, and she has been arrested on drug-related charges. The senator was in fact behind an investigation on extrajudicial killings of over 1,000 people in Davao, the city where Duterte was mayor for a long time. It looks like a transparent attempt to get an awkward person away from the political stage. There's now the idea, indeed, of bringing back the drug penalty the death penalty on serious drug-related matters. There's no question it'll get through the Parliament. It's important that we should respond firmly to this murderous campaign and immediately suspend GSP Plus for the Philippines and call for the freeing of Senator De Lima, who's completely innocent. Thank you, President.
Castaldo. Monsieur député Marc Tarabella, 1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
In September 2016, we already were concerned at the situation of the Philippines and the conduct of President Duterte as he tried to expunge the drugs curse in his country. Now, sometimes dialogue can be used as a pretext, but we should not fail to condemn the methods used by the President leading to the deaths of 7,000 plus people. This has just made things worse. Leila de Lima, who has been toppled, his opponent, shows that he will do everything to achieve his ends. We need to work to ensure her release and the dismissal of the charges brought against her. And my colleague Mrs. Veja talked about the nature of the dossier against her. The speaker's lost his microphone.
Repeat last words, sorry.
Yes, Chair.
I'm also especially worried by the wish of the President to bring back in the death penalty, which was dismissed and then brought back in and then dismissed and now brought back in again. And he wants to extend it from drugs-related offences to include other crimes in the future. Thank you.
Tarabella. And now, time for catch the procedure. First speaker, Deputy Jiří Pospíšil. Take a floor.
Pane předsedající, já se chci přihlásit k vystoupení svých kolegů.
Thank you. I'd like to endorse the words of my colleagues who have drawn attention to the way in which the war on drugs is being conducted by illegal means, and also with regard to what was said about the death penalty. Reintroduction of the death penalty globally is something that I view with great concern. This situation in the Philippines is similar. The efforts made by the President to reintroduce the death penalty are a step backwards, as are the brutal and inhumane procedures which have been followed to track down criminals by the President, and we should condemn this decision. Thank you.
Děkuji. Next speaker, Monsieur député Jean-Paul Denaut. S'il vous plaît.
Thank you, President. It's well known that Senator de Lima has been fighting hard for the protection of human rights, and Rodrigo Duterte has often been the target of her investigations for various human rights violations. It seems now that he's doing all he can to discredit the senator, and he said publicly that he would destroy her. In the present situation, the use of criminals as witnesses for these accusations is dubious, to say the least. These methods should be unreservedly condemned. Justice needs to respect certain values, which are the European-type values, and the senator's values need to be respected both in the Philippines, and her rights need to be respected in the Philippines and the rest of the world. No matter what the topic is, power alone, even if it's that of a government, is never a substitute for justice in a democracy. Thank you, President.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur député. Next speaker, Deputy Notis Marias. Take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The combating of crime, and particularly the scourge of drug crime, is something which member states have been attempting to handle here in Europe. The state is the right body to try to combat drug crime. But, of course, we need also to respect the rule of law and respect the principle of proportionality. If we see what's happening in the Philippines, we see that the scourge of drugs is being used as an alibi for some settling of accounts. And this is now the president trying to remove his political opponents. There's also the question of labour rights in the Philippines. We don't hear much about that, but there are thousands of child labourers, for example. There is a lack of respect for labour rights, and this is why a large number of multinationals are making a lot of money from the exploitation of Philippine citizens. Thank you, President.
Next speaker, Deputy Sean Kelly. Take the floor, please.
Thank you, President. First of all, tomorrow, which is St. Patrick's Day, the Irish National Festival, I would like to wish everyone at home a happy St. Patrick's Day. In relation to this topic, every country has the right to fight against illegal drugs and also fight the drug lords who run drugs through their countries. But it seems that the President is going overboard here. More than 7,000 people were killed by anonymous assassins, and we have to take this with a grain of salt. It's also clear that the President is using this process to discredit his opponents, such as Senator de Lima. This is obviously not right, and we should pressure the parties to end the death penalty and be fair with all their opponents. Thank you.
Deputy Jonathan Arnott. Take a look, please.
Drug-related crimes are an evil scourge on society, preying on the weak and causing untold misery and suffering. They should, of course, be treated with appropriate gravity. But there are legal, legitimate means of fighting a war on drugs, and there are illegal, illegitimate ones. And what Duterte is doing now through extrajudicial killings is absolutely wrong, and we must surely all condemn it. How can the world trust that government to give a fair trial to Senator de Lima when it tramples upon due process and judicial proceedings? In Western societies, we often take for granted fundamental freedoms like the presumption of innocence, habeas corpus and the right to a fair trial. These are sadly being eroded by the Duterte regime. There is a huge difference, Mr. President, between bringing true criminals to justice and what amounts to vigilante mob rule.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie pośle, za pańskie wystąpienie. And now, finalement, Madame Deputy Maria Grappini.
Ms. Grappini.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte, domnule comisar. Cred și sper că toți vrem să combatem consumul de droguri, dar nu.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think we need to counter the drugs trade, but the fight against the drugs trade is going beyond what's legally acceptable. I think when you carry out extrajudicial killings, this is inhumane. And this senator who was very clear in her campaign and in criticizing the system in the Philippines has now become a bad example because of these extrajudicial killings and arbitrary killings and detentions. And we as Parliament need to press for this person to be freed.
Mulțumesc. Dziękuję bardzo. Otrzymałem 7 projektów rezolucji, ale zanim o tym poinformuję, to oczywiście
I've got 7 motions for the resolution that have been submitted. However,
representative Federica Mogherini, Commissioner Julian King. Take the floor, Commissioner, please.
Chair, honourable members, thank you for this resolution that draws attention to the arrest of Senator de Lima, a former Secretary of Justice, former chair of the Human Rights Commission of the Philippines, and, as has been underlined, one of the most outspoken critics of the so-called war on drugs. The EU has called on the Philippines to respect its obligations under international and domestic law, in particular, to ensure the respect for the rule of law and human rights. This includes the right to due process, the independence of the judiciary, and a fair trial for all citizens. The proceedings in the case of Senator de Lima will be followed closely by the public, both in the Philippines and internationally. The EU will continue to underline the importance of the freedom of expression and opinion. As regards the wider human rights situation in the Philippines, the EU and member states in various meetings, both in Brussels and Manila, have conveyed their significant concerns on the legality of the killings and the so-called war on drugs. We have underlined the need for effective investigations of all killings, due process and access to remedies in this respect, and our concerns on the proposal to reintroduce the death penalty and on the proposal to lower the minimum age for criminal responsibility. We've called for the protection of human rights defenders, underlined the importance of the freedom of expression and the freedom of opinion. The EU set out these concerns in its statement to the UN Human Rights Council earlier this week, and the EU and member states will remain engaged with the Philippines on all of these issues. At the same time, as has been recognised, we will also continue to assist the Philippine government in their efforts on the peace process, the economy and poverty reduction. Further to a request by the Department of Health, the EU is prepared to continue to provide assistance in support of a holistic approach to drugs policy. Under the multi-annual indicative programme, the strengthening of rule of law through legal and judicial reform is one of 2 key sectors. In particular, the EU Governance in Justice programme includes activities related to criminal justice and contributes to strengthening the capacity of the Human Rights Commission of the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Commissioner. Dziękuję bardzo, panie komisarzu. Otrzymałem 7 projektów rezolucji na zakończenie debaty.
I've received 7 motions for a resolution to wind up the debate. These have been submitted by all the political groups of the European Parliament. I will conclude the debate now, and the debate will take place in about half an hour's time later on today. So thank you very much to one and all. And the votes will take place at 12 noon. The sitting is adjourned.